Officer Jack Harris drove his patrol car through the silent streets of Hollow Creek. Each time his car passed by, everything remained still, as if reflecting the deep emptiness in his heart. 6 months had passed since Max, his loyal companion, died in an accident. The sadness, no matter how much time had passed, had yet to fade. On quiet nights, the feeling of loneliness and silence became even more pronounced, like the cold winds blowing through, tearing apart the pain in his heart. Tonight, the dim light from the lone street lamp on the Willow Creek Bridge made Jack feel more exhausted than ever. Suddenly, a weak cry echoed, as if someone was calling for help. Jack stopped the car, rolled down the window, and tried to listen. The cry came from under the bridge, fragile and full of despair. Without thinking much, Jack stepped out of the car, his long fingers gripping the flashlight tightly. He walked quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. "I must have misheard, but I can't ignore it," he whispered to himself. As he got closer, the beam of the flashlight illuminated every detail under the bridge. It was a sight that made his heart ache. A mother dog, thin and battered, was curled around her 5 puppies, trying to keep them warm. The mother dog looked at Jack with sad but hopeful eyes. It wasn't fear, but a silent cry for help, unable to be expressed in words. "It's okay. Don't worry, I'll help you," Jack whispered, his eyes filled with tears as a familiar feeling suddenly surged within him. The night cold seeped into Jack's bones as he knelt beside the mother dog and her puppies. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the blood-stained wounds on the dog's body, marks not of a wandering life, but of a life tortured and abused beyond imagination. He looked into Grace's eyes, the mother dog, eyes not full of fear, but a silent plea, as if the dog was placing her last hope in him. Jack's heart ached once again, the feeling of loss and loneliness flooding back like a tidal wave. He couldn't let her suffer any longer. "Don't worry, little one, I will help you," Jack whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. His eyes followed each weak movement of the dog, noticing the exhaustion in her frail body. Despite her severe injuries, Grace remained steadfast in protecting her little ones, and in her eyes, Jack saw boundless love, a fierce motherhood that nothing could break. As he watched the puppies sleep soundly beside their mother, he was reminded of Max, his old companion. Over the years, Max had not only been a work partner but also a close friend, the only one who truly understood him, never asking why he was sad or why he sat in silence late at night. They didn't need words. Just a glance, a wag of the tail, and Max understood everything. And now, Grace was like that, an unwavering soul, wordless, but full of hope and trust. Jack stood up, determined to call for help. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and dialed Dr. Emma Weston, the only veterinarian in town, though he knew she wouldn't be thrilled. Dr. Weston, whom he knew, wasn't particularly fond of rescues like this one, always considering them an unnecessary hassle. "Hello, Dr. Weston. I need you to come to Willow Creek right away. There's a mother dog severely injured and in need of urgent help," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. There was silence on the other end for a moment before Dr. Weston responded, her voice cold. "Jack, is she a stray? Are you sure this isn't a pointless rescue?" Jack clenched his fist, trying not to let his anger slip into his voice. "She's not a stray. She's a mother, trying to protect her babies. I can't just leave her." A few seconds later, Dr. Weston sighed. "I'll come. But this better be quick, Jack. Don't waste my time." Jack hung up the phone and looked back at Grace, the mother dog still bravely protecting her pups. An indescribable pain filled his heart. He looked down at his old jacket and told himself, there has to be a way to help her. I can't let a life like hers suffer any longer. While waiting, Jack sat beside Grace, gently stroking the mother dog's back. The puppies began to stir, looking around, unaware of the danger surrounding them. But Jack knew that without immediate intervention, these little ones might not survive. "Don't worry, little one," Jack whispered to Grace. "This time is a promise. I won't let you suffer alone anymore." Those words felt like a vow not just to Grace, but also to Max, the friend who was gone, now only a part of the memory, a part of the motivation that kept him from giving up. He would do whatever it took to protect Grace and her pups, as well as to reclaim a part of his own life. Time passed like long, endless moments until the light from the ambulance gradually appeared in the distance. Jack looked toward Grace, the mother dog still lying quietly, her bright eyes shining with hope, but her thin body seemed ready to collapse at any moment. The pain in Jack's heart deepened as he thought about the possibility that without timely help, Grace and the puppies might not survive the night. When Dr. Emma Weston's car finally stopped, Jack sensed the hesitation in the look on her face. Dr. Weston stepped out of the car, looked around for a moment, then quietly walked toward them. She said nothing, but her gaze was full of doubt and little hope. "Jack, her condition is really bad," Dr. Weston spoke after a moment, bending down to examine Grace. She looked back at Jack, her voice calm but tinged with exhaustion. "She's severely injured, and so are the puppies. But I'm not sure we can save them all without better conditions. This will take a lot of time and money." Jack clenched his fists and lowered his head slightly, as if trying to suppress the emotions rising within him. "I don't care about money, Emma. The only thing that matters now is saving them. We can't let them die in despair," he said, his voice filled with determination but also some exhaustion. Dr. Weston sighed, but didn't argue. She knew Jack, knew that once he made a decision, no one could change his mind. After a moment of silence, Dr. Weston nodded and began her work with a quiet attitude, but no longer with any doubt. As the doctor worked, Jack sat beside Grace, watching the little puppies wagging their tails, searching for their mother. These weak puppies, still unaware that they were in a life-or-death situation. Jack's heart tightened as he thought about how, if nothing was done right now, they would never see another tomorrow. "I won't let anyone abandon your babies," Jack whispered into Grace's ear, feeling as if he were making a promise to an old friend. He had promised Max the same thing, and now he was promising another being. Dr. Weston continued her work, checking each of Grace's wounds and doing everything she could to save her. After finishing the examination, Dr. Weston approached Jack, looking at him seriously. "She can survive, but she needs to be taken to the veterinary clinic soon. This injury, it's not just from a stray dog being hurt, it's a sign of long-term abuse, Jack," Dr. Weston said, her voice low and thoughtful. Her words were like a knife to Jack's heart. He couldn't believe that someone could treat such helpless beings like this. Who could do this to her? Jack bit his lip, anger making his hands clench. Who could abandon her? Abandon these helpless babies? Dr. Weston looked up at him, her gaze not exactly comforting, but understanding. "Sometimes, Jack, there are people who have no heart. They only see animals as tools to make money. And Grace, she's been their victim. But now, she needs help, and we may be her only hope." Dr. Weston's words echoed in Jack's mind. He wondered, how long had it been before people started seeing animals as beings with emotions, with love? Had the community, where he had devoted so many years, ever truly cared about these lives? The thoughts swirled through his mind like a torrent. But now, Jack knew that nothing was more important than saving these fragile lives. He wouldn't let anyone, any creature, suffer when he could help. "We will save her, Emma," Jack said firmly, his determination unwavering. "And I won't stop until the truth is revealed." Dr. Weston looked at him for a moment, her eyes seeming to say something, but in the end, she just nodded. "I'll help you." The next day, when the news about Grace and the little puppies spread throughout Hollow Creek, the division in the community began to show. People started gathering at coffee shops, grocery stores, and even in the park, discussing Jack's decision. Some sided with him, calling for help for Grace and her pups, while others were less enthusiastic, even criticizing his actions. Martha Wheeler, a powerful member of the town council, was one of the first to oppose. She couldn't stand the waste of resources on insignificant issues. "It's just a stray dog, Jack. We can't keep pouring money into things like this," Martha said, her voice cold as it echoed through the council meeting. Jack sat silently, his eyes filled with anger. He knew it wasn't just ordinary opposition. Martha had truly seen those small creatures as obstacles to the benefits she was trying to protect. "Don't you understand, Martha?" Jack spoke, trying to keep calm even though his heart was boiling. "This is not just a stray dog. This is a life, and she needs help. If we don't step in, who will?" Martha just shook her head, her eyes full of contempt. "Things like this can't change the town. Just send them to the vet and be done with it. The rest will be a burden on all of us," she said indifferently. Jack felt as though he had been slapped in the heart. The way Martha spoke about those fragile creatures made him feel enraged. Her words felt like a declaration of indifference, a lack of compassion for the pain Grace was enduring. "You don't have the right to decide who deserves to live and who doesn't. Don't treat these innocent beings as a burden," Jack said, his voice firm. But not everyone stood with Martha. Emily Sanders, a young girl who loved animals, stood up to argue. "Martha, you don't understand. Grace is not just a stray dog. She's a mother, and we can't abandon her. If you think saving a mother dog and her pups is a waste, then you're hurting the very heart of this town," Emily said, her eyes shining with passion. Emily's support made Jack feel like he wasn't alone in this fight. Despite many opposing voices, at least there were people who understood and shared Grace's pain. Emily continued to advocate on social media, spreading Grace's story and attracting attention from everywhere, even from animal welfare organizations in major cities. The story was not just about a mother dog, but about compassion and sharing within a community. Each day that passed, Jack felt the weight of the responsibility he was carrying. Every evening, after work, he would return to the veterinary clinic, caring for Grace and monitoring the health of her puppies. Truly, this was not an easy task, but his heart couldn't be indifferent. He remembered the years spent with Max, the companion who had passed away, and felt the similarity between Max and Grace. Both were loyal, resilient beings who fought for life. "You've been there, haven't you, Max?" Jack asked himself in a moment of silence. "You suffered so much, but you always stayed by my side. I can't do otherwise. I must help her." The bond Jack felt with Grace gradually became a sacred connection. He wasn't just saving her, he was saving himself from the grief of loss that he had never fully overcome. Hollow Creek, despite the people who didn't understand, would not stop Jack. He would fight for every life, for life itself, for the hope that Grace had given him in those moments of quiet understanding. The next day, Jack and Grace sat together again, the warm morning light shining through the window of the veterinary clinic, but Jack's heart still felt heavy with anxiety. Grace, although better cared for, had not yet fully recovered. Her wounds still seemed to be healing, and the little puppies remained weak, shivering at the slightest breeze. Every morning, Jack took the time to check on them, reminding himself that he had to do something to protect them from prolonged suffering. Dr. Weston, although not one to easily show emotion, could not hide the worry in her eyes as she examined Grace. "She may not survive without proper care, Jack," Dr. Weston said, her voice lowering as her hands gently touched Grace's wounds. "But the issue is not just about saving her life. We need to understand her past. These wounds are not random." Jack stared at the mother dog, a heavy, indescribable feeling in his chest. "So, does that mean she was abused?" Jack asked, his voice choking, his heart tightening with each word. Dr. Weston nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Yes. These wounds show that Grace was used as a breeding tool. She was most likely kept in some facility to breed continuously, without any chance to rest, until she was worn out." The thought made Jack's heart ache. Every day, he saw the resilience in Grace's eyes, but he never imagined that such a lovable and loyal creature had to endure such a cruel life. "Who could treat her like that?" Jack asked, his voice on the verge of breaking. "Who could strip her of the right to be loved and live a peaceful life?" Dr. Weston remained silent for a moment, seemingly deep in thought. "There are people who see animals as nothing more than tools for making money, Jack. And sadly, we may never find out who is behind this." Jack lowered his head, pain swelling in his heart. He couldn't imagine that there were people capable of such cruelty to defenseless lives. "We can't let this end here," Jack said, his voice growing stronger, tinged with anger. I won't give up until we uncover the truth. Dr. Weston looked at Jack, then at Grace. I know, Jack. But sometimes the truth isn't always easy to accept. No matter what, we'll do everything we can to help her. In the following days, Jack relentlessly searched for clues. He began investigating Valley View Kennels, where Grace may have been imprisoned and forced to breed endlessly. Through a few old friends and some information from animal protection organizations, he discovered that Valley View Kennels might be involved in an illegal animal breeding network where animals were treated cruelly just for profit. One late afternoon, as Jack sat in the veterinary clinic, watching the little puppies playing at Grace's feet, he remembered Max. He remembered every moment when Max protected him, always by his side during difficult times. Max, if you were here, what would you do? Jack wondered, his heart swelling with intense emotion. I will do everything to make sure no one else has to suffer like she did. At that moment, Emily walked in, her face filled with determination. Jack, I found some important information about Valley View Kennels.
We need to act now.
If we don't do something, more dogs could fall into their hands. Jack looked into Emily's eyes, filled with passion, and felt a wave of hope rise within him. They were not just fighting for Grace. They were fighting to ensure that other vulnerable creatures would not have to endure such pain again. We won't stop, Emily. She won't die in vain, Jack said, his eyes shining. I will bring the truth to light, even if it costs me everything. And so, Jack's determination became not just about saving Grace, but about helping all the other animals being abused. This battle had become a fight for justice and compassion. Jack would not give up, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The following days, Jack and Emily continued to delve deeper into the investigation of Valley View Kennels. They had gathered clear evidence of the facility's cruelty, but Jack felt that he still hadn't reached the end of the road. It felt like there was something still being concealed, some dark truth that he had to uncover to end the painful days that Grace and the other animals had to endure. One afternoon, when Jack returned to the clinic to check on Grace's condition, he sensed a change in the atmosphere. Grace had gotten a little stronger, her eyes no longer carrying the same hopelessness as in the early days. But what surprised Jack more was the noticeable change in Grace's behavior. She began to exhibit strange reactions whenever a truck passed by outside the window. She would raise her head, her ears standing up, her eyes filled with panic as she looked toward the road. The little puppies, just like their mother, were silent and observed the scene. Jack sat beside Grace, a feeling of unease rising within him. What are you afraid of, little one? Jack whispered, gently stroking the mother dog's back. For the first time, he clearly felt that Grace was not just panicking from painful memories, but was seemingly trying to warn about something, as if she sensed something approaching. What's wrong with her, Jack? Emily asked, entering the clinic, her eyes full of worry as she saw the tension on Jack's face. She's reacting to the trucks. It seems like she recognizes something we don't know yet, Jack replied, his gaze still fixed on Grace, as if hoping she would explain something. Emily bent down, looking into Jack's eyes before glancing over at Grace. Could it be that she remembers the place where she was kept? Could these be signs of abuse in some facility? Jack remained silent, his eyes never leaving Grace. A feeling of emptiness and pain surged within him again. I don't know, Emily, but I feel like there's a connection between her and those trucks, between what she went through and what we still haven't figured out. One morning, while searching for more clues from the residents of Hollow Creek, Emily unexpectedly found an old post on social media describing a dog with injuries identical to Grace's and seen near Valley View Kennels. What was even more surprising was that in the photo, the person taking the picture mentioned that the dog had been adopted by a family from Valley View several months ago and showed signs of fear when seeing a truck similar to the ones Grace reacted to. Emily immediately called Jack and informed him of this discovery. Jack, we've found it. There's a truck that she recognizes. This is an important lead, Emily said over the phone, her voice excited. Thank you, Emily. We won't overlook this. This is what we need to get closer to the truth, Jack said, his voice firm, but his heart filled with complex emotions. He knew he hadn't been wrong to trust Grace, to believe in the invisible connection between them. Grace was not just a discarded dog. She was a victim, a companion in the fight to reclaim justice for all the abused animals. That evening, when Jack returned to the clinic, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened during the investigation. He thought of Max, the friend he had shared many difficult moments with, and now he was continuing the fight for an ideal Max had taught him: loyalty, resilience, and never giving up. "Max, do you see this?" Jack murmured, his eyes fixed on Grace lying calmly next to the puppies. "We're getting closer to the truth. You taught me so much, and now I'm going to use all my strength to protect these lives." Emily, entering the room, smiled softly. "We'll make it, Jack. She and the puppies won't suffer anymore." Jack smiled, looking at Emily. "And we won't stop until all the truth is exposed." The perseverance in Jack's heart grew stronger. He knew that each step mattered and was bringing him closer to the justice that Grace and the other animals deserved. They would not be abandoned again. Jack stood outside the veterinary clinic, his gaze fixed on the slightly ajar door. Despite having spent a long sleepless night, he couldn't take his eyes off Grace and the little puppies. Their condition had improved, but he still couldn't stop worrying. They were not safe yet, and he knew that every passing minute could bring them closer to the truth that had been buried for far too long. Emily approached him, holding a file in her hand. She looked tired, but her eyes showed no sign of hesitation. "Jack, I found some important information about Valley View Kennels," she said, her voice filled with determination. "They're not just an illegal operation. They also have a scam network, selling animals to unethical people. And I think they're connected to several other animal abuse cases in the area." Jack furrowed his brow, an indescribable unease rising within him. "So, what do we do next?" he asked, his eyes seeming to pierce through everything standing in the way of the truth. Emily took a deep breath, then turned a page in the file. "There's an old witness who used to work at Valley View Kennels. They want to provide information, but they require confidentiality. No one can know their identity." Jack felt a spark of light flicker in his mind. "This could be our only chance to break the whole thing wide open," he said with resolve. "We can't let anyone be too afraid to speak out. Let me contact them." The tension in Jack's chest continued to grow. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, everything could fall silent again. But this time, he wouldn't let innocent animals suffer in the shadows. When Jack met the informant, he could hardly believe what he was hearing. The informant, a former employee of Valley View Kennels, revealed that they had witnessed horrifying scenes: animals locked in cramped cages, without light, with no space to breathe. They were forced to breed continuously, and when they could no longer reproduce, they were abandoned, discarded like worthless objects. The sight was unimaginable, the witness said, their voice hoarse with fear. "I saw hundreds of dogs stripped of their right to live just because they could no longer make money. But I can't stay silent anymore. I can't live with that guilt." Jack felt a surge of strong emotion, an overwhelming anger. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak out," he said, looking into the witness's eyes filled with pain. "We won't let those creatures suffer any longer." After gathering all the information, Jack and Emily decided to plan reporting the case to the authorities. They knew there would be much opposition, but they couldn't turn back now. The truth had been revealed, and they had to keep fighting. When Jack returned to the clinic, he looked at Grace and the little puppies, their eyes bright and full of hope. These small beings were no longer just victims of a cruel system, but symbols of the invisible strength that only love could provide. He gently stroked Grace's head, feeling her warmth transfer to his hand. "We're almost there, girl," Jack whispered, his gaze filled with determination. "I will never let you suffer again." In that moment, Jack realized that the fight wasn't just about rescuing a dog or a group of animals. This fight was about justice, about protecting lives that had no voice in this world. And he wouldn't stop until the truth was fully exposed, not just for Grace, but for all the abused and abandoned animals. With unwavering courage, Jack knew they were on the right path. the path of love, justice, and compassion. And that was why, no matter how hard it got, he would never give up. The animal care conference was approaching, and Jack felt that every step he took was heavy. He had prepared so much for this day, from gathering evidence to meeting with witnesses, all for a single purpose: to bring the truth to light. But as he stood before the panel of experts and attendees, the anxiety within him remained unshakable. The doubtful glances, the sharp questions, would they truly understand what Grace and the other animals had gone through? Jack looked around and saw faces full of passion, but also cautious eyes. Grace's story was not just an isolated case. It represented thousands of creatures abused and abandoned in the shadows. He knew that today was the most important day of his life, not only for Grace but also for the fragile beings he had pledged to protect. When it was his turn, Jack stood up, his heart pounding, but he tried to maintain his calm demeanor. He had grown accustomed to these tense moments, but this time, the anxiety was stronger than ever. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not here today just to talk about a dog. I am here for a battle for those who have no voice, a battle against those who exploit them, treating them as tools for profit. Jack began, his voice clear and strong. A silence filled the room, and everyone listened intently. Experts, lawyers, animal protectors, all eyes were on him, hanging on every word he spoke. Grace is a prime example. She was abused, used for continuous breeding until she could no longer do so. And when she was no longer of value, she was discarded like an old object. But she is not the only case. This is the story of thousands, millions of animals, and we cannot stand by any longer. His eyes flashed with an unshakable determination. He recalled the moments spent with Grace, the sleepless nights caring for her and the puppies. He remembered the defiance in Grace's eyes whenever the truck passed by, and the worry she carried when speaking of the past. She lived a life she did not deserve. But we can change that. And we must change it. At this point, Jack paused, as if allowing his words to sink in for the listeners. He looked around at the faces and saw the change in their expressions, from doubt to empathy. Emily stood behind him, looking at Jack with pride. She knew this was the pivotal moment, and everything depended on how Jack could reach people's hearts. What can we do? A voice called out from the back of the room, one of the board members. How do we stop this from happening? Jack looked directly at the person and replied, "We need to change how animal breeding facilities operate. There must be stricter oversight, and if we do nothing, places like Valley View Kennels will continue to exist, continuing to harm these vulnerable creatures." The room fell silent, no one spoke, but Jack could feel the change in the air. He looked around and saw solidarity in the eyes of the animal protectors, those who had quietly fought for so long but had not yet found a strong enough voice to bring about change. A woman stood up, a renowned veterinarian in the animal protection community. "I agree with what you're saying, Jack. And I think we can start by creating a legal campaign to tighten regulations on animal confinement conditions. Without a change at the root, we won't be able to stop incidents like Valley View." Jack felt as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his chest. He no longer had to fight alone. This was not a personal battle. This was the battle of all of us. The words of the veterinarian were like a new ray of light, sparking hope that they could finally change the system, that they could save lives like Grace's. After the conference, Jack and Emily stood outside, in the cool evening air. "We did it, didn't we?" Emily said, her smile as bright as sunlight. Jack looked into Emily's eyes and then at Grace, with the puppies playing around her.
Yes.
But this is just the beginning. We have much more to do. And I will never stop until no dog ever has to suffer like that again. In that moment, Jack felt the power of love and perseverance. He knew they had embarked on an irreversible journey, and no matter how difficult the road ahead would be, he would never give up. The next day, after the conference ended with important decisions, Jack returned to the veterinary clinic, but he did not feel at peace. In fact, he knew that the battle was not over and many challenges lay ahead. The trip to the conference was just the first step in a long journey. Although he had gained new allies and they had achieved significant results, The truth about Valley View Kennels, about what Grace and countless other animals had suffered, had not yet been fully exposed. Jack stood by the window, looking outside, as images of Grace, the frail puppies, and the moments of care he had given them came clearly to his mind. He wondered if he could do more to save them, whether the cost of the truth would be too high. But the answer seemed to lie within the stories he had heard from witnesses, from those who had seen the cruelty at Valley View with their own eyes. When he returned to the clinic, Emily entered with some documents she had gathered. "Jack, we have some new information," Emily said, her eyes shining with excitement. "I spoke with a former employee of Valley View Kennels. He provided more details about the illegal activities there. This will help us fully expose the truth." Jack looked at her, feeling a surge of hope in his heart. "Good work, Emily. Things are starting to progress. But we need to act quickly. We can't let Valley View continue operating for another day." After several hours of work, Jack and Emily had gathered enough information to submit an official complaint to the authorities. As Jack had predicted, opposition from powerful figures in the town was not small. Martha Wheeler, still one of the most influential people in the community, did everything she could to block the investigation. With her position on the town council, she put pressure on animal protection organizations trying to derail the truth. "Jack, I can't believe she did this," Emily said, her voice choking with anger at Martha's actions. "She used all her power to block justice, and now she's trying to cover everything up." "We can't let her win, Emily," Jack replied, his eyes filled with determination. "This is no longer just about Grace. This is a fight to protect all the other innocent animals, and we won't stop until Martha and Valley View pay for what they've done." A week later, the official investigation was expanded, and finally, the truth was revealed. When the crimes at Valley View Kennels came to light, the entire town of Hollow Creek was shocked. Former witnesses of Valley View bravely spoke out, recounting the horrific scenes they had witnessed. Authorities conducted inspections and gathered evidence of animal abuse, and began the legal process to shut down Valley View and bring those responsible to justice. Jack could not hide his emotions when he heard the news. His eyes welled with tears, but the smile on his face could not conceal the immense joy in his heart. "We did it, Emily. We've brought justice for Grace and all the other innocent lives." Emily smiled, her gaze gentle. "Yes, Jack. Thank you for never giving up." But there was still one thing that prevented Jack from feeling completely at ease. Although Valley View Kennels had been shut down and those responsible were facing justice, Martha Wheeler was still free. She had used all her power to hide the truth, and now Jack knew that her price had not yet been paid. When a town meeting was held to pass new animal protection measures, Jack decided he would not let the truth stop at the closure of just one facility. He stood up to speak, his voice full of authority and resolve. "Martha Wheeler cannot continue hiding in the shadows. She has betrayed the trust of this community. If we don't stand up, if we don't demand justice, then everything we've done today will be meaningless." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at Jack, then at Martha, their eyes filled with suspicion. The air was tense, but in that tension, Jack felt a new strength. He knew that he was no longer alone in this fight. The town meeting took place in a tense atmosphere, as if all eyes were focused on Jack. Although Valley View Kennels had been shut down and those involved were facing punishment, the issue was far from over. The biggest problem, as Jack realized, was the shift in the community's attitude toward animals. Investigations, justice battles, everything could become meaningless if people didn't change the way they viewed and treated these vulnerable beings. Martha Wheeler, who had caused so much trouble, still sat silently in the corner of the room, her cold gaze showing no signs of remorse. She remained one of the most powerful figures in town, and despite being heavily criticized by the public, she still refused to acknowledge her mistake. Jack turned back, looking at the crowd listening intently to every word he spoke. Once again, he wondered, can everything really change? Will what he's doing have lasting significance? Or are they just small victories that won't change society's perspective? "We've done good things," Jack began, his voice firm and full of emotion. We've saved Grace and thousands of other innocent lives. But what's more important is what we do after this. Can we change how people treat animals? Can we build a community that truly respects life and justice, not just for humans but for all creatures? The crowd fell silent. Jack knew that his question was not just for the community of Hollow Creek, but for all of us, those living in a society full of contradictions. How can we change habits and values that have been deeply ingrained in society for so long? Do we have the courage to face uncomfortable truths? And what can one individual do in a world full of power and personal interests? The story of Grace and the puppies was not just a story about saving animals, but also a lesson in courage, perseverance, and standing up for what is right. We, each person in society, have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable, whether animals or humans. The question is, what will we choose to do when faced with great challenges? Will we be willing to sacrifice and stand up, or will we turn away and ignore? At the end of the story, Jack stood in the middle of the room, his gaze fixed on everyone with a determination stronger than ever. He knew that the journey was still long, and the answer to his question would not come immediately. But one thing was certain: he would never give up. So, what about you? What will you do when faced with a problem bigger than yourself? Will you stand up or remain silent? Will you fight for justice or turn away in fear? This story is not just about saving a dog. It is a reminder of the importance of every small action, every decision we make in life. In today's world, where many issues like injustice, abuse, and indifference still exist, the choice to stand up, even for the smallest of reasons, can create monumental changes. So, what will you choose?